Sabastian Sawe broke the 2-hour record in the London Marathon.
An historic performance, 1:59.
Wearing an ADIDAS.
The ideal recipe is you've got a moment, you've got an athlete and a product. And if you can put all of that together, you've got the magic.
The example of this last film is the opposite of performance marketing.
5-minute film is one of a full suite of things that we're going to deploy in and around the World Cup. And of course, it's a peak moment, but there's lots that surrounds what we're doing.
Your role is really to get this big idea from global and see how you can effectively cascade it.
Think about it as a relay race, like a 400-meter relay race. We're dependent on each other. So, global might be running the first leg, the market might be running the back straight, and then the countries are bringing it home. Let's be very clear, in 2023, Adidas was essentially a loss-making brand. Again, if I think and step back and go, one of the challenges that brands have is how well known they are, how well recognized they are. It's not a problem that Adidas has, but what did Adidas stand for? Could consumers play back for you a really clear or sharp understanding of what the brand was about?
It's also the time that the brand shifted from impossible is nothing to you've got this.
Maybe we should be a brand that should be about championing the removal of that pressure and just getting back to enjoy sport on your own terms so that you realize the possibility.
If you had to build this function from the start, from scratch, what would you do differently? Good morning, Roy.
Morning.
It's very nice to have you on Marketing Factories. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Your title is Vice President of Brand Activation Europe. For people that are not familiar with the Adidas structure, what does that actually mean in practice?
Sure. Adidas is it's a matrix organization. So you either work vertically, kind of within a business unit. So think I work in a football business unit or a running business unit or whatever, or you work horizontally across those business units and channels. So my role is a horizontal role. Practically, that means I have teams in omnichannel, in digital, in media, and in publishing. And therefore, from a specific, more functional point of view, we're talking about things like visual merchandising, retail marketing, retail space management, media, and full funnel media, including affiliates, CRM, membership, product learning, and we could go on. And then I also have a responsibility for elements around the brand campaign, inputting and shaping how the brand calendar operates, and then perhaps probably one of the most important ones is also sizing and allocating our overall marketing investment in Europe.
That sounds big. How many people are we talking about and how many markets?
So it's 120 people roughly, and we cover 19 markets in Europe. But my teams are split between some here in London, majority actually in Amsterdam, some in the global headquarters in Herzogenaurach, some up in the UK office in Stockport. So basically, wherever I need to be, I'm in the wrong place.
You used to be in Adidas many years ago.
Yep.
Then you left, and then you came back again. And am I right to? I'm not sure if I remember this correctly, but this role was created for you, right?
Not strictly. There was a version of this role that existed. So. I came back. I mean, I think probably it maybe for context, it's useful. I started off in FMCG. I worked for Unilever. And I made the big change to move into the sports industry it's a very simple story, just to combine a passion for sport and a passion for marketing. And that's when I originally joined Adidas. But I came back when I had the opportunity to come back. I think the appeal for me, for wanting to come back was simply a passion I have, a passion for the brand. When I worked at Adidas, it just felt like it was my place. It's a hard thing to try and describe, but it felt right. A passion for the people. It's really just a good lot of people that you work with, and at the end of the day, that's who you're going to do and spend a lot of time with. So working with good people is obviously highly attractive. And then fundamentally, the potential of this brand is incredible. Still is incredible. There's still much more potential here, and that's an appeal in itself. So when the opportunity was presenting, I was pulling back on a very positive set of experiences when I joined before, and I was like, well, there's a chance to jump back in and hopefully make a difference.
So I'm mostly asking because there's this expression, I'm not sure how it's phrased exactly, that if you do the same thing twice and you expect different results, then maybe you're an idiot, or some softer word than that. But what did you expect it to be different when you came back? And has this expectation materialized, and in what ways?
I mean, I get your point. There's always this sort of adage about don't go back. But I mean, the role on the company I left was very different from the role on the company that I came back to in terms of scale and size, the way it was organized. So in some respects, it was similar. I suppose maybe it's about sort of, having different ingredients, but having similar ingredients, producing two different recipes, if you see what I mean. And so I think my expectation really was, actually, I know a little bit about what I'm going to step back into. That's a lot of positivity there, but things have changed and we can move on because everything was set up was slightly different. And I think that's what was appealing.
So in a perfect timing, if I may say, 2 weeks ago from the day that we're now recording, Sabastian Sawe broke the 2-hour record in the London Marathon wearing an ADIDAS. What an iconic moment. Congrats, guys.
Thank you.
And what was, as a marketer, even more impressive was just seeing 350 or 400 billboards, I don't remember the number I read, all around London popping up within hours. I would love for you to walk us through, how does this engine that creates this perfectly timed thing actually look like on the back end, the planning, the decisions, and how was that made possible?
I think, we're very lucky as a brand because you have a sporting and a cultural calendar that drives attention, drives moments. But there's a lot of conversation these days about the attention economy. But the reality is, for brands, finding moments where you can ride on the back of something, have an ability to cut through, gives you that sort of super boost, if you will, to be able to be salient. And what I think actually you could probably trace back to 2014. Yeah, I think 2014 in the Brazil World Cup. Where we first started doing and deploying what we'll call reactive marketing based off a sporting calendar. And for us, this sort of idea is about how do we take those moments and make them matter? And it's kind of like sort of brilliance at speed. And sort of the ideal recipe is you've got a moment, you've got an athlete or a partner and a product. And if you can put all of that together, then you've got the magic, if it works. But obviously, that's also the brilliance and the joy of sport. So for us these days, it was, and particularly with, if we think about what Sabastian has just done, which is an unbelievable achievement, it's sandwiching this. It was both a pre-active set of marketing and a reactive set of marketing. Did we know it was going to happen? No, obviously, but it was clearly something that was being planned towards. So the global running business unit who've been developing the product, the global sports marketing team who've been working with Sabastian. Actually we could trace back to September last year at the Berlin Marathon, where that was our first thought and plan that he might break sub 2. Unfortunately, the weather was too warm that day, so he didn't. But so this has been something that we've been planning and has been likely. And then what we've got is particularly for the running team, both at a global level and at a market level and at a country level, working together and thinking about scenarios. So we're planning out what happens if Sabastian wins, what happens if Sabastian wins and goes sub 2, and then what do we do off that? And that sort of creates these two decision trees, and there's content that's being prepared, ready, because it's a predictable possibility. And possibility it remains because it still requires an athlete to produce in an unbelievable achievement. And as I say, for any of you who've not watched the speed at which he runs or what you would need to maintain yourself, I think it was equated to keeping running like 100 meters at 17 seconds for 26 miles.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's nuts when you think about that in terms of athletic achievement. But I think it's also important for me to kind of go, what we've evolved from perhaps in reactive marketing in 2014 is now pre-active and reactive. So what we were trying to do was sandwich and own the moment, because you can't rely on Sabastian doing what he did, and there would not have been the same cut through on a broad consumer agenda had he not gone sub 2. If he'd just won the London Marathon, which was an amazing achievement in itself, but just winning a marathon happens all the time. But breaking that magic sub 2 time is the thing that's enabled it to explode. But for us, therefore, it was about owning the moment pre-actively. So if we come to the London Marathon, it's obviously a centerpiece moment of the marathon calendar over the year. We don't sponsor the race. You've got every running brand.
It's crazy that you don't sponsor, and you were the race.
Yeah, we don't sponsor the race, but clearly, and also we've got every brand coming to try and showcase, get their elbows out pre the race to go, come and look at me. We've got some really interesting stuff. So our mission was own that moment. We're extremely fortunate that we had incredible innovation in the ADIDAS Adizero Pro Evo 3. The previous version of the shoe weighed 140 grams, and this version of the shoe weighed under 100 grams. And the incredible achievement from the global team and the innovation team in developing a product like that. So bringing to the marathon that story, working in particular with the London team here, the PR team in the UK should take great credit in creating a really fantastic event that meant that we could bring together product news in an interesting way to present to both to create earned media. Means that we could own the moment before and really cut through. So that takes great teamwork, bit of great collaboration. And then you cross your fingers and hope the marketing gods are smiling upon you. And Sabastian did his thing. And for us to have actually 2 athletes deliver under 2 hours and be the only 2 athletes who've ever gone under 2 hours, they're both Adidas athletes. They're both wearing the same shoe, the Pro Evo 3. And you just go, okay, now we have to hit the go button. So the go button was on the gold strategy, let's call it, with the sub 2. And so we went very big. That meant that we could also deploy. There's a documentary piece that's on YouTube that had been shot in anticipation that this might happen, and that went live. And so we've had incredible value, I guess, if you will, or out of this whole event, and that's
what
good.
Meticulous planning,
and now we have to build on it. And now there's the next step. So there's more to come.
So the world record happens.
Yep.
What was the reaction inside the team? So was it like an immediate at everyone message from someone? Like, just give us a little bit of the color.
WhatsApp has never been so hot. It's probably the best summary I can give you. I mean, there was a level of pride bursting through many, many people, both people who had literally been, fundamentally part of the project, and then just an overwhelming sense of pride because, that goal of sub 2, there is another brand that's been trying to do that for quite a few years, and they obviously did their version with a very controlled delivery of that. So for us to do it in a real and amazing way was just so both great pride in the company, great pride in the product that was being built, a little bit of competitive one-upmanship, of course. Everyone's been buzzed. And also, I think, buzzed knowing we've just done that, and we all knew that the World Cup campaign was coming 2 weeks later, and going,
crazy.
They haven't seen anything yet. Yeah. If this goes well, which we think it will, this is going to be amazing. So it's a really lovely run we're on right now.
Adidas right now is all the hype. You guys just released this epic film for FIFA with a few celebrities, if I may, a few. But it hasn't. It's an incredible turnaround story rather than anything, because things were not rosy for very, very recently in history. Like if you look back in these last 3 years and all of the decisions that Bjørn Gulden has taken, and expressed like a playbook, what are the building blocks of this turnaround?
Yeah, I mean, let's be very clear. In 2023, Adidas was essentially a loss-making brand. We're a long way from that now.
Crazy.
And I think there's a lot of elements that have obviously been put in place to re-energize the brand. But I think if I was trying to distill a lot about Bjørn's message when he came back to the company, I think it was a reminder of what Adidas has. So whether it be an innovation pipeline that was going to deliver freshness to the market in great new product, but equally, if you're a sports brand with 75-year history, boy, you have an archive. And so our ability to also look back and think about how do you reinterpret and re-express product that was originally designed for sport but presented in a lifestyle context. So I think it's sort of like remembering the value of what we've got in product terms and what we can bring. I think remembering also the value that we have on being a global brand with global distribution is a very powerful weapon in the marketing mix. If we slip it all back and go, what's your distribution strategy? Well, the fact that you have distribution in many places is a massive competitive advantage to many brands. But the question is, how did you get it? And who's important in facilitating that? So I think, we spent a chunk of time in the early part of, or in the prior regime, with a strong emphasis on a D2C strategy, which I think we didn't step away from, but it's more about rebalancing and reminding ourselves about the importance of the wholesale customer and the customers that shop there. Ultimately, if you strip back, our European business is, in terms of channel mix, we're 60-65% made up by wholesale business, similar as it is for North America. So the importance of that customer in whatever segment that they're in, whether they're more a sport retailer or a lifestyle retailer, I think that was key. And then I think the third thing was getting back to being a sports brand, because fundamentally our credibility, our relevance, our appeal is rooted in being a sports brand. And, sure, we sell lots and lots of product that's not used for sport, that's worn in a lifestyle or fashion context. But what's our permission to do that? And our permission only comes from being a sports brand. That DNA is our passport into a very big market of, let's call it lifestyle, footwear and apparel. And we only have that from that root in the sport. So I think the playbook when Bjørn came back was about those three things, and then instilling both externally, but I think also somewhat internally, a confidence and a belief to re-energize us and say that's what we can get after. And then, if I then come very much home to what was the global brand and a small brand of marketeers doing, we were sitting there trying to go, we're an amazing brand. We've got such fantastic opportunity. Again, if I think and step back and go, one of the challenges that brands have is how well known they are, how well recognized they are. It's not a problem that Adidas has, but scrape beyond that and go, but what did Adidas stand for? Or could consumers play back for you a really clear or sharp understanding of what the brand was about? Yeah, it got a bit shaky in that context. And we were going, okay, it's almost like we were a bit almost like out of focus. And that's the issue, I think, that we were then trying to deal with in terms of then saying, if we're rebasing and re-expressing what the brand does, yeah, we can bring great product. Yes, we can have great distribution. But what are you? What do you stand for? And what's the brand about? And that's been also a fundamental ingredient.
I'd love if we can double click onto that a little bit, because there's been, it's also the time that the brand shifted from impossible is nothing to you've got this.
Yep.
A decision that many marketers would challenge, and sometimes exactly because it's very dangerous to change the fundamentals. And it seems that it's working out for you. But I would love to understand what was this shift connotating.
Well, I think the question of who we are as a brand, what did we stand for, what are our marketing fundamentals, was the question we were trying to answer. And I think at its heart, it sounds very easy to say, but you're going to have a successful brand if you are consistent, and I mean consistent in how you look and how you feel. I think also if you are clearly built out of an insight which is quite enduring, and that can give you a sort of creative idea that is a great platform from which you can build. And then you also have to make sure, I mean, that's lovely, but all of that can stay on a page effectively unless you're then visible, you know, and you have to have the ability to make yourself visible to the consumer so that they can begin to understand you. So, you know, ultimately the decision to step away from, you know, Impossible is Nothing as a wrap-up for who we were as a brand and what we were trying to stand for, and moving to You Got This was kind of the end point of the strategy. It's sort of, it's easy and it's very visible now, but it's kind of the end point. If I come back to it, you know, I think what we were doing was reassessing on an insight basis what was connecting in sport and the way that kids particularly played sport or what they felt. And there was this fundamental issue about pressure, and pressure being a reason to disengage with sport, and basically not express yourself to your full potential. And fundamentally that idea of saying, well, hang on a sec, shouldn't we as a sports brand, if I go right back to what does Adidas believe? Adidas believes that sport has the power to change lives. Okay, that sounds like it's our fundamental principle. So if we're sitting there and saying, actually, sport and what surrounds sport, or the way that you might play sport, you're being inhibited somehow by this pressure. Maybe we should be a brand that should be about championing the removal of that pressure and just getting back to enjoy sport on your own terms, so that you realize the possibility. And that is at its heart is then going, well, okay, how do we summarize that, and how does that on the end get expressed to the consumer? And that's where You Got This came from, as opposed to whether Impossible is Nothing was necessarily fit for purpose and really captured what it was we were trying to say. And I think also it felt very much that message of being able to convey an encouragement to enjoy sport, an encouragement to just express yourself, it felt very eye level. You know, absolutely not a kind of brand trying to be up here talking to a consumer down here, but it was trying to go, no, we're with you, we get it, this is how sport should be. And that feels very, sounds a bit weird to say it like this, but it feels very Adidas, and it felt very appropriate. And then you know, you've seen that borne out in, you know, we recognize that means we've got a lot to build in both owning You Got This, making sure it's attributed to Adidas as a kind of, I say You Got This, I think of Adidas. You know, other brands have other lines where people might make a more immediate connection. So that requires a multi-year commitment to building that, which we have. And, you know, we're on that journey. So when we relaunched the brand in 24 with the first version of You Got This, that was directly talking to the sort of the individual themselves, saying to kind of ignore the pressure and express themselves. That was version 1 of the campaign in 24. And again, we're talking about an enduring idea. So in 25, we flipped the script, and that's became the +1 idea. So same idea, but this time about expressing the power of you as a supporter, coach, mentor, friend, or whatever, being able to encourage people to believe in their possibilities and explore sport on their terms. You know, right up now to, and you were just referring to it, the Backyard Legends film, which we've just released, which is, you're right, has an incredible array of talent. I mean, it's basically putting into the film past and present talent. in a way that kind of only Adidas can. But they're not the heroes. They're part of the storytelling. Timothée Chalamet is not the hero of the film. Yes, he's a narrator and he's a fantastic in terms of the glue. But the hero is about championing sport on your own terms, enjoying playing football in the backyard, essentially, you know, in the court-based. We're making a hero out of the team that had never lost for 30 years, and having a bit of fun with it. And just trying to put a bit of a smile on people's faces, that this kind of like, sport should be fun, should be enjoyable. You should play it because it makes you feel good. So I think with a hint of competition, because that's also important. So in a way, I think now what we're doing is, in this version of it, we're about competitive joy and really sort of bringing that and celebrating. And again, you know, what a fabulous backdrop to do it. You know, you cut Adidas, we bleed football. And we've got the world's biggest tournament about to break. We have an ability to deploy a lot. So that as a backdrop to our brand campaign and the next evolution of You Got This just made a lot of sense.
One of the best paradoxes I have for Adidas is that especially brands that are struggling financially, or there's been a downturn, it's in those discussions with the CEO and the CFO, you always look for investment in marketing that will have a direct attribution, and I think that's the reason why so many brands have gone down the performance marketing route. Mm-hmm. And you see that 60% of budgets being invested in performance and just 40% in brand building. And you have Adidas putting everything they have behind brand building, and I think the example of this last film is the epitome of the opposite of performance marketing. Of course, it's going to be performance marketing, but it's a 5-minute film, absolutely creative, absolutely generating emotion that you can tell if there's any stats you can share. But if I had to guess, I would say it's very effective. This, for me, well, it shows me an organization that really understands how brands are built. I would love your take on that.
I think so. I don't want to focus in almost on the 5-minute film, because honestly, the 5-minute film is one of a full suite of things that we're going to deploy in and around the World Cup. And of course, it's a very visible kind of peak moment, but there's lots that surrounds what we're doing. But probably to answer the question, I will take you back to 23, 24, where it is what are we going to do to rebuild this brand? And honestly, I think what we've been trying to do is is be humble enough to look at what's the best knowledge, wisdom out in the marketplace about what do you do to build a good brand. So, you know, let's ingest our version of Byron Sharp. Let's make sure we've gone and spoken to Les and Peter and really absorbed what the long and the short of it's really telling us. Have we spoken to Walk and talked about enduring icon principles? Yes. Are we working, or have we been working with System 1 and understanding what goes into making a brand effective? And I think we've been looking at all of those stimuli and then trying to go, okay, how do we reinterpret that and create a sort of Adidas way of marketing? And I don't think, I mean, we certainly haven't always got the balance right of investment between sort of performance and brand. But I think, you know, if I step back and talk from a European point of view in terms of how we've structured ourselves, you know, I'm responsible for full funnel marketing, right? So a classic structural problem that many companies have had, many marketing departments have had performance marketing over here and brand marketing or media over here, and they're competing. Well, you know, back in, I can't remember what year it was, 2019, 2020, we brought that together and said, okay, well, we're going to be one media team from top to bottom. And think about think about marketing in a full funnel context, and then try and live those principles. So I think what we've been doing since in the reset of the brand, it almost created the permission to go, okay, well, clearly what we've been doing isn't necessarily working, but we've got lots of good ingredients. What's the best of what's out there? And then how can we ingest that and apply it and then try to live it? And therefore, it doesn't come just in brilliant pieces of communication or a unique insight, which I've spoken about earlier. It's brilliant product. It's about a brilliant way of presenting ourselves at the point of sale. You know, it's the whole suite of touch points. It's about re-expressing ourselves and making sure the content we're creating, that we're utilizing on social platforms, is native and understands how consumers are going to engage with that platform. I think we've just been questioning how we do. I also want to say, because it's actually, I think it's almost the silent glue. Okay. If you, probably glue is silent, but maybe, so that's a bit of a strange expression. But if you step back and you were to put around the room on polyboard or whatever in display, Adidas creative from different business units 5 years ago, individually, many pieces of the work would have were brilliant, were excellent, but what they did was not add up to anything much. I think he would have said he would have had 1 + 1 + 1 and actually got to about 2. And internally, led by our global creative director, there's been a very clear expression of both in design terms, but also so affecting product, but also in creative terms, so very much expressing visual expression, both from a 2D point of view and also then applying into 3D. How do we look and feel? What is consistent? How do we, in many respects, it was like, how do we clear out the noise and simplify and stand for something and have much more of a definitive house look and be much more coherent and possibly insistent on how that is applied. So both in terms of messaging hierarchy and prioritization of storytelling, but then how that's then applied through a lens so it's expressed creatively. So genuinely now, I think if you sat in a room and you looked at work that's being outputted from the originals business unit, from the running business unit, from the football unit business unit, from the training business unit, and I could go on, and from the brand, you go, they're all a family. They don't all look exactly the same, but they're all clearly related. And it sounds really obvious. It's kind of like, oh, I really can't believe you weren't doing that. But actually, we've got so many stories from so many different points that we can tell. The ability for that to be accidentally incoherent was high. So no one was doing it without anything other than the best of intention to do the best for the brand within their category or whatever, or within their channel. But what it's about is going, no, we need some coherence and a much more greater sort of glue that drives and sticks us together. And that, together with some of those elements I spoke about earlier in terms of how you create that unique insight, how you express yourself, what you're consistent with, are all of the secret sauce that's turning the principles from Byron Sharp, from Les and Peter, from Walk, from whatever, into reality. And I think explain an awful lot behind Adidas's marketing playbook.
As I hear you speak, I tend to think that what you just talked about has a lot to do with how you guys are structured, and in particular your role. So if I look at your role, there are, as a VP of brand activation, your role is really to get this big idea from global and see how you can effectively cascade it and maybe localize it in so many markets across Europe. But then also maybe you have campaigns that are born in Europe and then cascaded the other way. Is your structure an answer to how you've been building this cohesive Adidas look and feel and experience?
So I think there's an importance. I think there's probably three things that occur to me when you ask me that. I think firstly, a matrix setup for a global brand is not an unusual setup. What you can be confident in any structure is it's not perfect. And of course, there's points of either tension or ability for things to get misinterpreted or fall apart. So as always, beyond any structure, what matters is the people that sit within it and their, I guess, common sense of ownership and what they believe in. I think then very importantly alongside that is, I think how, and I'll reference it with a third point in a second, but how we would talk about a global, we call them markets, not regions, but a global, regional, local structure. I think you would typically, if people were then describing it, they would describe it as a hierarchy. So global, regional, local, or global, market, local. And I think that fundamentally that's not how we want to think about that or present that within Adidas. And honestly, not just because we're a sports brand, but I think it's a helpful metaphor is think about it as a relay race, like a 400-meter relay race, because we're dependent on each other. So, global might be running the first leg, the market might be running the back straight, and then the countries are bringing it home. But the baton only gets round if we're able to pass it effectively between each other. And I think, if you look for recent, whether it's pronouncements, I'm sure even in the recent results, Bjørn would have spoken an awful lot about Adidas as a global brand with a local mindset. Yes. That is how we're trying to live being a brand. And I think what's that trying to do is getting the best of globality and the best of localness, because the consumer lives in a country. Consumer doesn't live in some strange construct you called Europe. That doesn't exist. They live in different countries. There's a lot that's the same, but there's a lot that's different and nuanced, and you're really going to be at your most effective if you've understood that. But at the same point, you can't be so atomized if you're trying to be a global brand that you don't have some central coherence, consistency, guidance, frameworks, enablement that puts it all together. So we're trying to live, I don't want to call it a tension, but we're trying to live a balance between how are we a global brand and how are we a local brand, or how we have that local mindset to really understand. So if I think about 3 examples, if that's not too many, if I take in product terms, there's a thing called the Tang Jacket, which is a jacket which was developed by our China team for China. Okay. It got seen on social and various other things, and the desire and demand went off, like with literally a kind of, where can I get that jacket? That's an amazing jacket, whatever. And so we've that's driven by local, where have we rapidly reacted to that and scaled it, where people have seen opportunities to bring it into their market and sell it to customers in their area. And then ultimately, we've then integrated it even into sports marketing. So when Manchester United walked out last weekend, they were wearing a badged up version of the Tang Jacket. So I mean, that's something that's a product that started in a local country, albeit quite a big one, and that we've scaled. We could look at it and saying there is absolute the ability for countries to do local partnerships and local product collaborations. So the UK themselves just recently did a partnership with Molly May and some specific products around Superstar and Samba, which were incredibly successful. That's not going to translate to all markets around Europe, let alone all markets around the globe, but that ability to be in touch with where are we going to get local resonance and connection and an ability to present something interesting from a story point of view. And then I think the other thing is about harnessing the ability of a global, or in this case, I talk about a scale that enables countries to do things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. So we at a European level are creating I say, even though I say it myself, hopefully an incredibly successful, fingers crossed because we haven't done it yet, fantastic piece of creator activation around the World Cup that will be lasting essentially the entirety of the World Cup. It's only being made possible by having a European mindset that we are investing and creating a framework, if you will, building the stadium. it's not literally a stadium, but then inviting the countries to participate. No one country would have ever done that on their own or had the resources to do it on their own. So there it's about us building something and then enabling the countries off the back of that. And so that's why I talk about it very much as a relay race, because it's not about, oh, well, Global had the idea and then everyone's got to do it. It can be the idea can start somewhere else and go back round the chain, or it can start where in Europe and we can just bring it home with the countries. So I think it's trying to get that balance right. And that's, I think, the success that we're trying to bottle, capture and repeat. And it's not straightforward, but it then just requires people more than anything else.
What is the agency operating model like? Is there a global is there one agency partner globally, or is there one agency for Europe? How does this multiple different agencies for different jobs?
There's no one agency.
Okay.
There's no one agency. We obviously have agencies of record. We have, creatively there will be some preferred agencies that are in, and obviously, but we're just like any big brand, big company working through a procurement process and ensuring that we have a tight list of trusted partners, because also this is not about initiating and recreating with an agency, different agency each time, because that's just too painful and too much of a waste of time.
Correct.
So I think creatively it varies, but so there are global agencies. And, if I take our media structure, we have a global media agency of record that's translated into having regional teams and country teams, and that literally goes through the whole gamut from top to bottom, or from start to finish, if I should carry on my analogy. But equally, we have local, regional, and global agencies with a mission to be what you need, just not too many, and trusted partners. So there isn't a definitive what's the model. It's about what works and what makes sense and what can we drive out of the best efficiency and effectiveness.
You see brands massively walking into this one agency, brands of your size walking into a one agency kind of model for efficiency, scale, etc., and maybe creative cohesiveness, and you are managing to have this absolute ADIDAS feeling coming out of all of these different things, maybe selecting the best of play on each for each thing. So
yeah, I think also maybe that's because of kinds of, if you think about what we make, we make shoes and clothes, and fundamentally that means we have a lot of design and creativity inside the company already. And so I don't think that means that it makes sense that everything would be outsourced where we'd be looking for creative cohesion. I think that creative cohesion needs to come from within, particularly when you're trying to apply, a design direction. Yes, of course, we're trying to make sure that from a product point of view, the designers are on point in terms of styles, colors, where silhouettes are going, and the rest of it. But I think creates a sort of intuitive sense that we should be able to know a lot more about what we stand for and who we are. That means that I don't think you'd be partnering with just an agency outside and they could do all of that, because typically you'll be talking to an agency more in, even if we're talking in the most communications neutral idea, they've got no idea about product and how to build the right product and what does an ADIDAS product look like and how does that all come together. So that needs that strong internal vision to drive that, and then we're trying to take that and translate that outside. So in some respects it's about giving the guidelines and the direction from a creative expression point of view to a global agency, but that equally means that I can pick that up and give it to a local agency, and they can both access the same thing to understand that's what ADIDAS looks like, and that's what ADIDAS needs to feel like.
Are you rethinking at all the way you're, not necessarily the agency operating model, but in general how you structure yourselves with this huge boom of the creator economy and influencers?
Yeah, I genuinely think many companies, we're certainly grappling with how best to, and I'll deliberately use this word, partner with creators, not use creators, because there's no question that they can bring an audience, bring an authenticity, bring a connection that is another valuable touch point in that 360 world of trying to connect with consumers. I think I describe it as grappling with it because it's extremely clear that if you are going to present the brand in the right context through a creator's eyes, you've got to allow them to play with your brand. You've got to allow them to create the content in their style, which then means that we've also got to be clear about our brief and clear about our expectations. We also have to be chilled about letting them do what they do, and therefore who we choose to work with and how we choose to engage with them is quite carefully considered. So I think we know what we're going to get, and we'll tend to also be seeking more and more to have ongoing relationships rather than sort of campaign-based relationships, because a creator, advocating Adidas one week and another sports brand the next, it's like, what was the point of that?
Correct.
But I think then it's about getting the balance right still, because there's going to be many touch points where we can still directly express the brand point of view, showcase how we want our message to be presented, and then the creator work becomes an augmentation to the core of the message, not the message itself. But we're playing around with the balance of how we do that, and some of our stories are, bigger and smaller, and therefore maybe in some of the smaller stories it might end up being more creator-led, but maybe there's less of a story and maybe it's more of a styling and a showcase thing, in which case that's less about a core product message and more about how you can make something look, and that can be incredibly valuable too. Looking
at your role and this Adidas marketing factory and how something goes from an insight to something that is active in the market. Mm-hmm. Can you walk us a little bit through what are those steps, if it's I guess it's a process, and I don't know how rigid of a process it is, and what are those steps within that process that you as Roy are the most, if I may, anal about, and the places where usually Roy pushes back?
So the process is a broadly common process. We run a seasonal business. We're doing seasonal storytelling. Therefore, we have a calendar that's defining when are we going to tell those stories. So you've got a work back calendar in terms of development of tools that are usually initiated by our global teams. Mm-hmm. But they are not working in isolation. It's an iterative process. It's a job for the market, the region, to be representing country views into that process and helping refine both the creative itself, maybe the talent that's featuring, the tools that's being developed, and making sure those tools are fit for purpose. And I think that...
How do you define a tool? Sorry.
What's the tool? So whether it be the materials, whether it be for retail, for social, for whatever. So the assets. Okay. All part of the toolkit. But I think that's working on this sort of rhythm, and we have clear dates and gates of sort of check-in moments that are at a couple of 100 days out, 150 days out, etc. So we're working out from the deployment of when we know we need to land those assets, and those are getting more and more final. And obviously, the role of the local team is getting larger as we go forward towards the launch date, because they're then, what the global toolkit isn't the answer. It could be 80% of what gets deployed, and then there's 20% augmentation or localization, but it could equally only be 50%, and there's a load more localization and augmentation. It depends on the story. What does Roy get most focused on? So that's the process, and that exists in every business unit for every story, with more or less in it, depending on the priority of the story. I'm most focused on the thinking, rather than the activation idea in the end. I want to be clear that the translation of the thinking and the story we're trying to tell, the message, is really clear as it's coming forward into, we often talk about it as a message house or otherwise. My team here will be smiling if they listen back to this or watch this. Yeah, he always talks about the message house. What are we saying? What are we actually trying to land? And in the end, it's that same version. If you go back to whatever version of a creative brief anyone's writing, somewhere on it is going to be, what's the single most important thing we want to say? Or what's the single message? What do we want consumers to think or do as a consequence of this? Those two lines are what matters. around everything else. So great thinking. What do we actually want them to take? What do we actually want to say? What's the input? What's the output? And how is that being expressed? That's probably the bit where I'm most exercised.
So as we said in the beginning, you were in ADIDAS, you came back.
Yep.
You've been in this role for quite some time now, so I'm sure you've built things the way that, well, nothing is perfect, but that they work as effectively as possible. If you had to build this function from the start, from scratch, what would you do differently?
Yeah, the role has fundamentally changed from the scope and size and scale of it from when I took it on to where it is now. It's definitely, I'd probably call it two different jobs, really. That's an interesting one. I think the success of any team is being born out of, and I think, it's great people, but what's the recipe for great people? I think that's a diversity of backgrounds and experiences. I think it's about a clarity around roles, responsibilities, and processes, however dull that might sound. And I think it's sort of clear communications and expectations. So that's kind of I don't think there's anything rocket science in saying that, but again, as always, doing that's quite difficult. And I said at the start, that I've got teams in these different locations. And I wonder, had I been given a completely blank sheet of paper and said, build it all in the same location, Roy, whether that would have been more pro than con? Because there's a clear advantage in having a distributed team in different locations, the experiences they have, the different people they interact with. But there's still a massive value in people being together. That if you take about a sort of a post-COVID theme about people coming back into the office, one of the great values was for the more junior members of the team
absolutely.
To learn and see from more experienced members how stuff works. How do you deal with things? And you can't look over someone's shoulder in the middle of the Teams call or if they're in their home office working in that same way. So I wonder if I had that chance, whether it'd be like, oh yes, let's just create it in one location. And then I think the other thing if there'd been an ability to institute it, and I'd perceived that I would have done it, is I can't underestimate the ability to sit in someone else's shoes. Over my career, I've done and I'm not going to do this, but I'm going to do a global, regional, local job, right? I've also sat outside of a marketing function. I've sat in different companies. But that gives you a perspective, and yes, it's through experience, but I would say at more junior or entry levels, the ability to get around in different functions, be in a global role, be in a local role, be in a regional role. What does it mean? What do the people have to deal with? What are you actually doing? I think that perspective is so invaluable to being able to build how to do good work with whichever part of the chain is that you're sitting in as you get more senior. And I think if I would rebuilding this, somehow mandating or instituting a sort of en masse job rotation regularly happening, however disruptive that might be, it's quite difficult to imagine how to do it. But I think that's the bit that sort of beyond people having the sort of initiative or nous to get up and go and do that themselves, I would almost like to go, no, that's almost expected. If I go all the way back to when I started with Unilever, their graduate training program, which is what I joined, although we had a home function, I was a marketing trainee, but we spent over the 2 years time in different functions. So I was attached to the technical function, and yes, I worked through on the production line, through the shift pattern. I gave you a bit of a perspective of what it takes to do that kind of job. Well, sort of just jumping that forward and going, so take that chance to work in different parts of marketing or different adjacent functions, because that's just massive for helping you appreciate how to be effective in business.
Absolutely.
So I think that would be the magic.
I think that's one of my favorite answers. Amazing. What is effective marketing for you? If you had to give an impromptu definition.
What's effective marketing? Being the #1 sports brand in Europe. Because that's the output. It's consumer desire, it's business success, it's all of those things. So I don't think effective marketing is effective unless it results in business success. And so there are, of course, lots of elements, sub-elements of that we could break apart into any of the functions. But in the end, the output is we need to deliver a successful business that's growing, that is a great place to work, the shareholders are happy, consumers love your brand, all of those sorts of things. That's what I'm really summarizing. That's the output of effective marketing.
So for my last question, and it's the signature closing of all of our episodes, if you had 58 hours in a room in this wonderful office with whoever you want to bring, most brilliant people in the room, to solve what for you is one of the most burning challenges in ADIDAS, or something you feel that would really propel the business even further, although you're having an amazing run, what would that be?
Well, I guess so my job title has activation in it, so it's all about brilliant activation. So if I assume that there's great thinking or strategy behind it, how can we help people do better activation? I think if I think about the challenge that the teams in the countries face, it's consistently going to be how do I link back to that thought about global brand with a local mindset. How can we do better at having better local consumer understanding, better local insight? And I think so systematically, if you accept that not all countries are the same size, not all teams are the same size, therefore resources are very different. If there was a way to figure out how to enable the countries to have a reliable and systematic route to better insight that felt that had some sort of either scale or real substance to it, I think that would be a big enabler, because at that basis, best insight, greater insight, quality insight is a basis for better creativity and better activation, and doing it in a way that would have a meaningful business effect. So I think if that's how you could help the countries, it also needs to be highly efficient. Maybe that's where our friend AI can come in and help. But that needs to be highly efficient, because they've got so much to do. We have so many stories to tell. It's just how do they then do that in their best way possible? And it takes a huge amount to get things done. So just trying to find an efficient way to do that and infuse them with even better insight. I shouldn't say that they don't already come with good insight. They do. But I think how you enable people in that way would be a way to end up with better activation, which is maybe a focus for what we should do.
Roy, thank you so much for your time.
Absolute pleasure.